God told the Hebrews to always remember the salvation he provided for them. God sent the plagues to show even Pharaoh and the Egyptians where salvation comes from. Today, as we look at the plagues in Exodus, the main thing I want us to remember is that salvation only comes from God. What is the main thing I want us to remember?
Salvation only comes from God.
Reading from Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 and 8, and chapter 6, verse 1. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Then the Lord said to Moses, Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out completely. Does everyone know what a cake pop is? A little dessert. God sent the plague so that the Egyptians and the Israelites could remember what he has done to and for them. I have made these cake pops so that we will remember what God has done for us. And as the Israelites enjoyed the salvation through the plagues, I hope that you will remember God's salvation as you enjoy the plague pops that I have made. Today, as we look at the plagues in Exodus, the main thing I want us to remember is that salvation only comes from God. What is the main thing I want us to remember?
Salvation only comes from God.
And this brings us to our first cake pop today to help us remember God's salvation, the snake pop of Aaron. Reading from Exodus chapter 7, verses 8 to 9 and 11 to 13. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, When Pharaoh says to you, Perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down a staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Something I have noticed with this plague is, sometimes, like the magicians, we might think that we can do things that God can do without honoring God. But if we fight him in this way, he will swallow up our rebellion like Aaron's staff swallowed the magician's staffs. So we should think about this as we swallow our snake pops after the service today. Now, we are eating snake pops, so we will remember that salvation only comes from God, like the Egyptians and the Israelites were to remember. But I'm also going to test as we go along here today, so that we can try to remember the plagues God used to save them. You can record it on these sheets, if you would like, as we go along. So, what was our first cake pop today?
The snake.
And what is the main thing I want us to remember?
Salvation only comes from God.
And this brings us to our second plague cake pop today to help us remember God's salvation, the cake pop of blood. Reading from Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 to 15 and 20 to 22. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river. Confront him on the bank of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials, and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. But the Egyptian magicians did the same things by their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. One question I had when I read about the plague of blood was, do we ever, like the magicians, try to copy what God is doing in our own strength and just end up making things worse? The magicians couldn't make water clean to make things better. They could just make more water turn into blood, making things worse. We can't undo or do what God can do. If we do, we really will only make things worse. This is one thing we should remember as we eat our cake pops of blood. Again, we are eating cake pops, so we will remember God's salvation like the Egyptians and the Israelites were to remember, that salvation only comes from God. But we are also going to try to remember what each of the plague pops are. So, What was our first cake pop today?
Snake.
Second?
Blood.
And what is the main thing I want us to remember?
Salvation only comes from God.
And this brings us to the third plague pop of salvation, the cake pop of the frogs. Reading from Exodus chapter 8, verses 1 to 4, 7, and 15. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country. The Nile will teem with frogs. They will come up into your palace and into your bedroom and onto your bed, into the houses of you and your officials, and on your people, and into your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will come up on you and your people and all your officials.'" But the magicians did the same things by their secret arts. They also made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Later, when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Something I have noticed about this plague is, like with the blood cake pop, the magicians could have tried to make things better, which only God really can do, instead of trying to make things worse by adding more frogs that they couldn't get rid of. But they didn't. When we're in trouble, do we give our problems to God to deal with, or do we make things worse like the magicians? One thing that struck me as I read about the frogs was that we need to remember to give our problems to God as we experience His salvation. So, what was our first cake pop of salvation?
Snake pop.
Second?
Blood.
Third?
Frogs.
Very good. And what is the main thing for us to remember?
Salvation only comes from God.
And this brings us to the fourth plague pop of salvation, the cake pop of the gnats. Reading from Exodus chapter 8, verses 16 to 19. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground, and throughout the land of Egypt the dust will become gnats." They did this, and when Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the ground, gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. But when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not. Since the gnats were on people and animals everywhere, the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen, just as the Lord had said. Something I've noticed about this plague is, this time, the magicians could not pretend to do what God did. They couldn't make gnats. But Pharaoh still didn't turn to God, like God wanted him to. This is interesting. Did you know that the word for gnats can also be translated as lice or mosquitoes? Can you imagine what a plague of lice would be like? Or have you ever seen huge swarms of mosquitoes? It would be even worse than that, because the plague would be so bad that only God, not the magicians, can make that many mosquitoes. So, as you eat your mosquito pops to remember God's salvation, let us realize that there are some things that only God can do. So, what was our first cake pop of salvation?
Snake.
Second?
Blood.
Third?
Frogs.
Fourth?
Gnats.
Very good. And what is the main thing for us to remember?
Salvation only comes from God.
This brings us to the fifth cake pop of salvation, the plague pop of the gnats. Reading from Exodus chapter 8, verses 20 to 21, 28, and 32. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning and confront Pharaoh as he goes to the river, and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you do not let my people go, I will send swarms of flies on you and your officials, on your people, and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians will be full of flies. Even the ground will be covered with them.' Pharaoh said, 'I will let you go to offer the sacrifices to the Lord your God in the wilderness, but you must not go very far. Now, pray for me.' But this time also, Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the people go." Something I have noticed about this plague is, in the summer, we often see flies in our houses. When we see these flies, we should always remember to keep our word, just as Pharaoh should have kept his word. As well as remembering God's salvation, we can also remember this as we devour our fly cake pops. So, what was our first cake pop for salvation?
Snake.
Second?
Blood.
Third?
Frogs.
Fourth?
Gnats.
Fifth?
Flies.
Very good. And what is the main thing God sent the plagues for us to remember?
Salvation only comes from God.
This brings us to the next plague, cake pop, the plague pop of the dead livestock. Reading from Exodus chapter 9, verses 1 to 7. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die.' The Lord set a time and said, 'Tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land.' And the next day, the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go." So, this is interesting. Something I've noticed about this plague is God let the Israelites see some of the other plagues, but he spared them from this one. God will never give us more than we can handle. Just as God helped them with the livestock, God will help us when we really need it. We can remember this as we eat our fly cake pops. So, what was our first cake pop of salvation?
Snakes.
Second?
Blood.
Third?
Frogs.
Fourth?
Gnats.
Fifth?
Flies.
Sixth?
Dead livestock.
And what is the most important thing to remember about the plagues?
Salvation only comes from God.
And this brings us to our seventh cake pop, the plague pop of the boils. Reading from Exodus chapter 9, verses 8 to 12. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt.